Hello there, Comic Clan, and welcome to Comics and the Cross, the greatest YouTubers that you've never heard of. I, of course, am your host for this evening, Cross, along with my partner in crime, Nitro, and we are joined by our very special guest, Mr. David Pepose. David, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for giving your time tonight to come and chat with us. What feels like one of the busiest men in comics right now is the amount of stuff I see coming out from you.
Very kind of you.
One of the OG interviews like we ever did too, so.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you guys letting me back on. No, I am very grateful to be on the show. Thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you, Cross, for all the amazingly in-depth looks at Space Ghost. I know I've gotten a real kick out of seeing your takes on everything, as the rest of our creative team, Jonathan Lau, everybody at Dynamite. So, no, I'm excited to be on, and thank you again for taking the time to be so conscientious and thoughtful about our work. It really means the world to us.
No, thank you for sending Space Ghost out to us to review. I've had the honor of getting to review all 4 issues of Space Ghost so far, and honestly, you made it really easy to give a good review on it. The comic's absolutely phenomenal. And this is not paid promotion. This is not anything from Dynamite saying talk up our book. Like, I absolutely love this book. It was so much fun to read, especially this latest issue. It's been an absolute blast.
Yeah.
For anyone who's watching as well, if you do want to catch up on our previous conversations with David Pepose, we have chatted with him before. I'll put a card up in the top corner. This corner, one of them. I don't know what way the camera's pointing right now, because Discord flips everything. But go and click on there and check out our previous interviews. We got to talk to David a good few years ago now, back when we first checked out Spencer and Locke for our Indie Comic Book Club, and then got to talk to him about his own creation, the OZ, a good couple of years ago as well. So, but since then, David's gone and made a pretty big name for himself, been writing with Marvel, writing Space Ghost. You're writing for all sorts of massive IPs now.
Well, yeah, it's definitely been a pinch me kind of moment the last few years. I'm always kind of feeling like if the simulation is glitching. But yeah, I've been so fortunate to work on some really cool books with some just really top tier collaborators and some amazing publishers and editors. And yeah, I'm just trying to be worthy of it. This is my dream job. This is the closest thing I've had to an astronaut job for as long as I can remember. So yeah, I appreciate all the opportunities I've gotten. Just that's what kind of gets me out of bed every day to try to take the biggest swings possible. Is yeah, I still can't believe I have this job, and I want to make sure I earn it.
Absolutely, and yeah, it's been a well-earned position. Like, if you have watched our show for any length of time, you know that we're pretty big fans of David's work and the stuff that we've read in his previous stuff. How did it come about, though, like getting to write something like Space Ghost? Because Space Ghost, like, it's different from Marvel in the sense of, like, Marvel is this, like, current IP. Even when you started there doing, like, Savage Avengers, I think was your first book there, and was all these, like, lower tier characters in Marvel, but they were still existing characters. Like, Space Ghost was, like, a Hanna-Barbera character that has not been written in comics for a little bit, is kind of, like, under the radar for everybody.
Yeah.
So how did that come about?
So the way I wound up getting put on Space Ghost was I've been emailing Dynamite for many years since my first book, Spencer and Locke. I'd email Nick Barucci and I'd email Nate Cosby, and every time I'd have a new book out, there are certain editors that I would always reach out to just to let them know I still exist and to show them some of the latest work that I've been doing.
Yeah.
And so I wound up writing Moon Knight City of the Dead and Punisher back to back over at Marvel. And I think Dynamite at that point felt like I had hit a critical mass that they wanted to reach out. And so it was my editor, Joe Ryban. He reached out. He had said, he had asked if we could meet at New York Comic Con last year. And so we get to the show. And of course, that's when Dynamite announces that they're doing this line of Warner Brothers comics, including Thundercats and Space Ghost and Powerpuff Girls and Johnny Quest. And so
nice.
Joe comes up to my table at New York and he says, "So I'm sure you heard about the Warner Brothers announcement." I was like, "Oh yeah, of course." He goes, "So we wanted to see if you'd be interested in writing Space Ghost."
Oh wow!
I think it was off. That was off of Moon Knight and Punisher.
Dude, that's awesome.
That they thought I might be ready for it. And it's so funny because, I grew up, like many of my generation, my primary exposure to Space Ghost was Coast to Coast.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I had graduated
Yeah.
college as my internship days at DC Comics that I learned that Space Ghost actually was like a traditional superhero first. Alex Toth, his creation of the cartoon in Hanna-Barbera, sort of on the wave of Adam West's Batman. Everybody either wanted existing superhero IP or they wanted to make their own. In the case of Space Ghost. And so it was during that internship that I learned about who Alex Toth was, and I learned about Space Ghost as a character. And I read Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti's run, their miniseries on Space Ghost, which came out about 20 years ago. And I got my hands on a trade while I was at DC, and I was kind of struck by the character that my preconceived notion of him as this talk show host, there was more to him. There were other facets of the character. And I remember reading that trade and thinking, I'm kind of surprised that Space Ghost isn't a bigger thing,
Yeah.
particularly in the comics industry. He's got all the ingredients of an A-lister. And so, of course, that's the thought that I had 15 years ago. And you sort of flash forward to last fall, and Dynamite's asking if I had any ideas. And I rewatched all the old episodes. I took kind of detailed notes. I wanted to get a sense of how Space Ghost worked and operated in this universe. And I was struck by how many amazing concepts that Alex Toth left. Those episodes are 5 minutes a pop. There's not a lot of room for character development. There's not a lot of room for backstory. Really, the only continuity, so to speak, is when the Council of Doom comes together in the last 6 episodes. And so, what I took away from it is that show really lived and died based on the designs. That Toth's designs really imbued so much character into all these characters when the scripts themselves didn't really have time.
Yeah.
And so, I was like, oh, this is a universe filled with potential. And I kind of felt like somebody, like a chef that had been given like all the top ingredients and being told, make a meal out of this because nobody's made a meal with these ingredients in 20 years. And so, yeah, it really just felt like
That's awesome.
one of those opportunities you don't turn down because there's so much cool stuff and so much freedom that you can tell in a book like Space Ghost.
Absolutely. And that's...
Yeah.
Yeah, only good.
No, go ahead. Go for it.
I was just going to say, it's like that.
I was going to say, like you said, my introduction to Space Ghost. Sorry, we got a little bit of a delay.
Sorry, I think we've got a delay happening between us. On you go, dude. You can go for yours.
I was just going to say, like you were saying, David, my introduction to Space Ghost was the cartoon. And I didn't really watch it a whole lot growing up. So you have this like campy, goofy, jokey character. And then when I read these 4 issues, and this dude's a beast. He's an animal. And it was just a really cool, like I'd never seen him like that before. So it definitely drew me in.
Thank you. A lot of that came from when I was rewatching all the old episodes. I also reread all the old comics, and so I read Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti being a big one. Of course, I reread Future Quest and Future Quest Presents. I read his appearances in Archie, the few that existed. Gold Key, the Mark Evanier, Steve Rude one shot. But of course, I think Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti really loom large over Space Ghost. And so the thing that really kind of stood out to me is that book came out the summer before Batman Begins. But you wouldn't know it because they're very much cut from the same cloth. That book was very much a standalone, gritty reboot origin story for Space Ghost. And I quickly realized I don't want to try to retread that territory. Joe Kelly already did that. He beat me to the punch by 20 years. And so the thing that really stood out to me was when I watched all the old episodes, Jan and Jason Blip were a huge presence in Space Ghost. Even more so than what the Kelly and Ariel Olivetti miniseries would suggest, where, Jan and Jace show up kind of briefly, but they're not huge parts of the story. And I realized, that's my through line, that Jan and Jace and Blip are kind of the point of view characters in the way that Kitty Pryde was when she debuted in X-Men. And so I pitched this story to Dynamite as it's not really Space Ghost year one, it's really Jan and Jace year one. And that this is the story of Space Ghost, kind of these kids helping Space Ghost reclaim his long lost humanity. And that became, I think, the emotional through line for the whole series for me, is that Space Ghost starts off in a dark place. He has been fighting crime by himself for some time. He's had a tragedy that has sort of put him on this crime fighting path, but he's been alone. And I think there's that when you're by yourself, when you're a man playing at being a monster, this is the guy who literally calls himself Space Ghost. He's walking around in a cape and cowl. It's easy to kind of forget who you are as a human being. It's a lot harder to put on that performance with an audience when you've got these kids who are who know who they are, and they're precocious and they're bright and they have their own tragedy. But the difference between them and Space Ghost is they have Space Ghost to lean upon. Space Ghost didn't have anybody. And so it's a little bit of, a push and pull between these characters. And I think that's been the most exciting part of it for me. I mean, I love, of course, reimagining all these amazing villains and playing in these different genres, but it's the characters that really are the most exciting for me. And I think that is what has made the book a success so far, is that people are responding to the characters. They understand Space Ghost is a grump, and they understand that Jan and Jace are going to climb over those emotional walls. And at the same time, when Jan and Jace get in trouble, Space Ghost, despite being a grouch, he's going to be the one that zooms in and saves them in spite of himself. And it's just a really fun ensemble kind of dynamic. And it's something that I feel like I've been building towards across my career. In a lot of my books, from Spencer and Locke to Savage Avengers, I love ensemble books. I love found family books. And this feels like maybe the most refined way that I've been able to approach those themes.
Absolutely.
And I really, it's been a fun book, a real gift.
Yeah.
And so,
no, you can absolutely,
I'm having a treat.
You can absolutely tell. And I think it definitely feels like a love letter to some of those old school comics and old school shows and things like that. Even I think I even said it in some of my reviews, like a lot of them are tropes that we know, and they're typical tropes that you see within things, but there's a reason they're tried and tested tropes, because deep down we love them. The grumpy protagonist and the kid sidekick who pulls these emotions out. I'm like, we've seen it a million times. Logan comes straight to mind. We've got Deadpool and Wolverine's just hit the cinema. Logan was exactly that story, but we love that story. Logan, The Mandalorian, all this stuff within just the last few years. But it's a trope we adore. And then even the kid ride-along character, it feels like your typical stuff, like the grump who now has the kid at their side. That's literally old school Batman. Why they brought Robin in was to give a ride-along character to this grumpy, dark superhero that didn't have that connectability. Well, here's a kid that the kids can connect to. It's that exact. But at the same time, you've also managed to avoid that. I think I spoke about this even in the first review I did. You have avoided this annoying pain in the ass kid trope that I despise with a passion, of that you put these kids in here and they're automatically just irritating and just in the way, and it's like, I'd really rather you weren't here. And I'm like, you somehow managed to avoid this with Jan and Jace, and actually they're really interesting, intriguing kid characters, but yet they're still typical little kids. Jace is a little rebellious, kind of douchey, teenage boy as you are at that age. Jan's a very intelligent, but almost sees herself as no, I'm an intelligent, proper adult, sort of as teenagers get to when they hit a certain age. I know all this, I know what I'm doing. You don't have a clue. But yet she's... And you've also made them really able to hold their own and handle themselves and deal with situations, but also they are still kids. And part of it, as you see, I think it's in the third issue especially, Space Ghost starts getting on to them. You guys need to be more careful. You don't actually understand what's at stake here and how much danger you're actually in. This isn't a game. Yes. You could die.
That's something that that last bit in particular is a theme that we're gonna keep kind of revisiting through the series. Is that it's a push and pull. Like Jan and Jace, they are audience surrogate characters, and I thought it was so smart that Toth and Hanna-Barbera, when they had the original cartoon, they were like, well, listen, we'll have a boy sidekick for young boys to project onto, and we'll also have a girl sidekick
Yeah.
for young girls to project onto.
Which was unheard of at
And
that time. Little girls
yeah,
liking a
it was
superhero project, we need to have a character for them. For what was it, the
very ahead
1960s?
of its
Space
time.
Ghost came out. That was not a thing. Like that was unheard of.
Yeah. And I think for me it was there's this push and pull between being a superhero is fun. We read these comics, this genre, because it's fun.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
on the other hand, like you said, it's not all fun and games. It's there's risks, there's dangers, there's costs, and you can sort of see a little bit of it in issue 4 already, and that's part of the reason why we went a little darker for this two-parter. Both to just kind of like flex our muscles in terms of tone, but also just like it's not always going to be easy for these characters. It's funny that you mentioned Logan and the Mandalorian, which is spot on, and it's so funny because for me, the dynamic that I was really pulling from for this actually goes back a little further. It was Dr. Grant and Tim and Lex from
Oh,
Jurassic Park.
nice. Yeah.
And that I think you see those kids in particular. You see they each have their own skills. You see that they're capable, but at the same time they're still kids, and so they still need Dr. Grant to help them. But they're also helpful to Dr. Grant in their own way, and that I think was like a core part of the DNA of this book. I mean, you can see that dynamic really shining through that. I think there's a degree. It's also a little autobiographical for me, and it took me a couple of issues to realize it. But a fun fact about me is that my younger siblings are triplets.
Oh
And
wow!
they were born. Yeah, they were born 10 days shy of my 9th birthday, and my whole life changed. I started counting everything in threes. Um, and I am realizing that I think that is very much a part of my Space Ghost book. Is when you're by yourself, you've got your own system, you know how to do things, and then suddenly you're like the dinosaur right when the meteor hits.
Yeah.
Everything is chaos, everything is different. You kind of have to adjust on the fly. And suddenly you're playing off of these personalities, these other personalities that can be very defined even at a young age. And so, I think that's sort of a lot of the stuff that I've been digging into. But in particular, I love writing Jan and Jace. I think they are my favorite characters. And if anything, I think the biggest challenge I've had in this book is to make sure that I'm balancing everybody properly, that I don't just make this the Jan and Jace show. And so, yeah, they've really been, I think, like my compass for this book. Every issue, when I outlined it, every issue had to have a villain that I wanted to spotlight, but every issue also had to, I had to answer, how does the relationship between Space Ghost and these kids evolve? How does Space Ghost either trust these kids more or vice versa? Or how does, maybe this is a step back, and so the relationship is going to be in a little bit more of a tenuous place. But I think, that's been, I think, kind of the formula for this book, and being able to kind of tell these stories and mostly done in one adventures. Although for fans of the book who read it this week, this is our first two-parter. I think being able to do that, we're kind of maximizing the runway. When Dynamite first approached me for this book, I was approved for 12 issues in an annual. And so I wanted to make sure that we really maximize that. And so by the time that people finish that annual, they'll feel like they've gone on like a real long journey with Space Ghost and Jan and Jace, and will hopefully that they will buy the evolution of that relationship. And so, yeah, it's been really exciting to see, and I feel like there's so many twists and turns coming that you guys aren't privy to yet, because I'm in the middle of writing issue 8 and issue 4 only just came out. But yeah, it's been a real treat. I think Space Ghost as a character is so cool because he's just, I pitched him as Batman meets the Mandalorian. But that means you can tell such a wide variety of stories with that character, and they all feel organic. None of them feel out of place.
Yeah.
And that's a gift for a writer, especially one that's as restless as I often get. This means that, like, if I feel bored in the slightest way, I can say, all right, I want to do a heist book. And so I did the Widow issue, or I want to do a horror story, Zorak. I've got a very fun kind of emotional blip-centric issue coming up.
That's awesome.
And, I'm in the middle of writing a big, like, kind of big, larger than life superhero SmackDown two-parter right now. And it all fits under the same umbrella, and that is very cool, and not many characters can do that.
That's awesome.
I will say you seem to be able to pull that off in some of your books as well, because having recently not just read Space Ghost from yours, but you also thank you, by the way, for sending us not only those, but you sent us the issues of The Devil That Wears My Face. And as I read through that story as well, I noticed very quickly that story takes twists and turns, and like you're very adept at telling different types of stories within a story. Like this is a superhero story and a sci-fi story, but like you said, there's a heist in issue 3. Almost like out of nowhere, like she comes along, yep, we're doing a heist now, but yet it fits. And there's a horror story with Zorak and The Devil That Wears My Face. Like there's a scene I think I literally describe in issue 3 or 4 where it's like it became the Count of Monte Cristo, essentially. Like that's essentially the route that it's taken. And it's like you seem to have a little adept ability to do that of I can tell the story I want to tell, but also I feel like writing this and this fits as well, so let's do it. Which is definitely a really brilliant talent to have, to be able to include all of that and still make it feel organic.
I think for me, it's the word restless keeps coming to mind, and that's why I think so many of my books feel like mashups in one degree or another. Spencer and Locke and OZ and even in the Devil, is that I always want to find at least 2 tracks of inspiration that I can then bounce between. Even Space Ghost, it's either the supervillains or it's the kids. And I can usually kind of bounce between one or the other when I feel like I'm in a rut. And so, that's sort of been the way that I always tend to write is I try to triangulate. And the books that I've had the hardest time triangulating are usually the ones that are the hardest to kind of go across the plate for me. But it's I think for me it's just I tend to research isn't even the right word when I'm writing a book. I try to mainline influences and inspiration. So if I'm doing like for Space Ghost, for example, I watched all the old episodes and I read all the old comics, and I'm just trying to get a full head of steam. So that way, when I'm sort of doing the Rubik's Cube of putting it all together, I can be like, oh wait, so that villain, I could put this villain together. Minor spoilers. For issue 4, we talk about Zorak being he's a cult leader, and they worship Lokar, the locust of the. And I had been thinking for a long time, okay, how do we? There are certain villains that I know I want to include. Is there any connective tissue here? And so immediately I was like, oh wait, like of course, like the 2 bug guys, like if one of them is a cult leader, and I'd already kind of established I wanted Zorak to be the Charles Manson of space. Nice. Oh, we can connect those dots, and what is he worshiping? Oh, he's worshiping Lokar. And so, I mean, I do think though being able to kind of jump between, it's kind of you to be like that's a strength. Sometimes I feel like it's a little bit of a weakness. It's sort of a little bit of like ADD on my part creatively, but that's sort of like if I feel like I'm not bringing something new to each issue, I feel like I'm not doing my job. And so that's why I try to throw in, I love throwing in car chases. I love throwing in issues where, we kind of weaponize the high concept, and we sort of say, okay, like this is a book about demonic possession. Okay, you're going to hell this issue. What's going to happen? And yeah, I feel like that way, like it still feels, I think, organic. It's all rooted in the same core concept, but it's just different ways of actualizing that.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, I wish I had like a better, smarter answer to any of that, because I still feel like that's something that's very much a work in progress for me. I'm trying very hard to make sure that I'm not just going to formula.
Yeah.
Anything, that I'm not trying to draw from the same well too often in too many books. And I know that the concepts often make things feel different, but I'm still always trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm always trying to figure out, is there another tool that I can add to the toolbox? Is there another way of telling this story, of filling up this real estate and making it interesting? And yeah, every time I sort of consume more media, it gives me more arrows in the quiver.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And may I say, I think it's obviously been working for you well. It's seen nothing but high praise for the book so far. So, you know, whatever you're doing, whether or not it's intentional or not, it seems to be working for you.
Thank you. I will say a big thing that I took for Space Ghost. I've told my editor Tom Brevoort this. I at Marvel, and Tom is having a banner summer with the X-Men relaunch, and he's been my editor at Marvel for it's been a little over 3 years now, and there are a few things that he kind of drilled into me that I've been trying to bring in for Space Coast, and one of them was sort of the importance of done in one storytelling. You know, I looked at books like Ryan North on Fantastic Four, and Steve Orlando and Scarlet Witch, and even what Jed McKay's doing on Moon Knight, where a lot of his stories are very self-contained. And that was something that Tom really instilled in me on my Punisher miniseries, which was, you know, that was a tricky book to write, in that we had to come up with a new Punisher that still felt like a Punisher, but also we were trying to navigate all sorts of political landmines, trying to sort of sidestep all of them while staying true to that character. So putting together a compelling origin story that still felt like a Punisher book, that was simple, that you could kind of explain quickly in the same way that you would like for Frank Castle's origin, while doing it in 4 issues and in done in one stories. And so that experience, I think I took that with me to Space Ghost, where it's like, okay, done in one stories, that makes you feel like over the course of a year, like, oh, we've really, you know, told a lot of stories. You look at like Batman: The Long Halloween; it's a very similar kind of structure in that regard. I think the other thing, I call it the Brevoort rule, and I managed. I've been working with Tom for 3 years, and I only met him for the first time at San Diego Comic-Con a couple weeks ago. But the Brevoort rule is, if you're writing superheroes, the thing that makes superheroes heroic is not that they punch out the bad guy; it's that they protect innocent people. And that's something that, like, I've really been trying to make it a point with Space Ghost, is that first issue, Space Ghost is trying to protect these kids. They're the innocents. And then by the end of issue 2, they have sort of stepped up as superheroes, and then they are trying to save civilians each and every time. So you see it in the montage in issue 3, where, you know, they're saving scientists from a pack of gargoyles. And that's, I think, a big pivotal point in issue 4, is that Space Ghost has told Jan and Jace, you need to stay on Ghost Planet. There's this deadly murderer on the loose. I don't want to worry about where you are. And of course, these kids get a distress call, and they can't reach Space Ghost, and they have to make that tough call. Do we leave knowing that Space Ghost will be furious at us and throw us out, but we can't let innocent people get hurt?
Yeah.
And so that is something that's, like, I think been really core for this to me, is it's so easy for superheroes to become this kind of self-referential dynastic kind of thing. And I know, especially in the era of, you know, when I grew up, all the books were 22 pages, and now they're 20, and those 2 pages, a lot of that being lost is the soap opera. A lot of that being lost is the supporting cast. You lose a lot of human supporting cast members in these superhero books. And while we aren't able to kind of build out a bigger cast in Space Ghost, we really are focused on these 4 characters and the villain of the week. We're still able to kind of make it a point that it's not just this like internal superhero slugfest, superheroes dealing with superhero problems.
Mm-hmm.
There's always like human beings, there's always civilians, there's always innocents that are caught into this, and that's what gives the stakes its meaning, especially in this like big wide sprawling universe where, you know, who cares if a planet gets blown up? You only care if a planet gets blown up if there are people living on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so that's like I said before, like Space Ghost, I wouldn't have been able to write this book 2 years ago, or 3 years ago. Like this is a book that I've told Tom, I've told Ricky Purden over there. The book only exists because Marvel trained me up to do it. But I have had a lot of fun taking all those lessons and bringing them to what feels like really like virgin territory. You know, Space Ghost is he hasn't been seen in a long running superhero show in 40 years.
Yeah.
Even Coast to Coast, excuse me, ended 20 years ago. The superhero run on the character, you know, was 20 years ago. Even Future Quest, he only kind of bookended that. So he didn't even, you know, this is a whole generation doesn't know who Space Ghost is, and we get to be able to tell that story. Like that's the reason why I took this project on, is like you don't get many opportunities like that in this business. Yeah, so far the response has more than justified the effort.
Absolutely, and I mean that's a heck of a thing to take on, that responsibility of sharing Space Ghost with a generation that really has never heard of him, doesn't know him. Like, even the generation I'm in, like I didn't really know Space Ghost. Like I could identify him and identify the costume, but I couldn't have told you anything really about the character or anything like that. So it's been a really
the costume is iconic.
Yeah.
I
mean, it's really been an introduction to myself as well, to see what Space Ghost is like. And it got sent to me, I'll be honest, when it was first sent, it's like, okay, yeah, I'll review it and stuff. I didn't have a dog in the fight, you know, I didn't like this isn't like a big thing for me. And I'm like, no, this is a comic I look forward to reading now. This is a comic that every week is like, every month I read it, it's like, this is getting better. Like, I'm getting invested now. And then this last issue was like, okay, I'm in.
Well, you know, it's funny that you're saying exactly the same things that I was saying when I started out, which was, you know, I didn't have like a strong connection to Space Ghost before, you know, Dynamite approached me for it. It was only as I did the research that I saw the potential that was there. But like you said, you know, if you had asked me a year ago, I would have said, "Oh, I'm not as familiar with the mythology. Like I know the costume, and I know Zorak, and I know that he's a talk show host." But that would have been like the limits of my knowledge base. I think a big influence behind this book, amongst many of the others I've been discussing, was J.J. Abrams' Star Trek. I grew up. I was the era of Next Generation. That was sort of my Star Trek. It was the Chris Claremont X-Men in space. I didn't really know Kirk and Spock, and McCoy, and Scotty and Chekhov and the rest. I didn't know them that well. Like I think I knew a little bit of cultural osmosis from my dad, you know, making Scotty references. But it wasn't until I saw the J.J. Abrams movie that I was like, oh, I get it. I get the appeal. I get why Kirk is awesome. You know, he's headstrong. He's willful. He's a guy who steals his stepdad's car. You know, he's also the guy that like gets into a bar fight and gets a Starfleet commission out of it, you know, by the end. He's charismatic, and you know, he's a wild card, and he's arrogant, but like he's confident in himself, and he manages to see things through. And seeing the way that the Calvin verse kind of reimagined all these characters, but still boiled them down into a recognizable core.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason why that movie is one of my favorite movies. And so that was something I've always wanted to do. And that's, I think, a big guiding ethos for a lot of my books, particularly when I'm sort of launching something from the ground up. is I'm like, okay, how do we boil this guy down into a particular character? And so that's our characteristic, and that's something that we're doing with Space Ghost, particularly with all the villains. Um, they say like a hero is only as good as his villains, and I feel like Space Ghost has a rogues gallery that's every bit as stacked as Spider-Man or Batman or the Flash. The Council of Doom versus the Sinister Six, like that's they really do go toe to toe.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was kind of what's a characteristic about each of these villains that really stands out to me, and that's something that I can kind of build off of. Brack, for example, watching those cartoons, that guy was not like a world conqueror by any means. It was him and his brother Sisto, just trying to heist a gold freighter. It's very blue collar aspirations. And so I was like, okay, that's cool. Like just starting off with like kind of this dirty mercenary. What's something about that kind of quality that I can then extrapolate upon? Somebody who's opportunistic, somebody who'll do anything for a buck. What if I turn him into a corrupt cop? Which is sort of what we did for issue 1, is the Brack and Sisto. That's the reason why Space Ghost doesn't just drop these kids off of the nearest galactic patrol station, is they're in the pocket of the bad guys as well.
Yeah.
So, doing stuff like that. The Widow, the thing that really stood out for me is that like she's not a fist fighter by any means. When I saw the Tyrannopod spores in the Council of Doom 6-parter, I was like, great, perfect. Like that's how she's more of an elemental, that she's got this control over plants. But I also like the idea that she's a thinker. She's smart. She's connected. That knowledge is sort of her, her power as well. And it wasn't until I was writing the issue that I realized, like, oh, she's also the only woman in the Council of Doom, and Jan being the only woman in this group, I bet she would see some sort of kinship there, and that became, I think, like one of my favorite parts about that issue. Is that like at the end of the day, the Widow is still trying to appeal to this little girl, because she sees that as sort of like this battle of philosophies.
Yeah.
And in Zorak, of course, like he's a praying mantis. Like, there's something inherently inhuman about him. The way he sees the world is like unsettling. It's not the way that you or I would see things. And so how do you kind of channel that perspective in a different way? And so I pitched him to Warner Brothers as the Charles Manson of space. And that's how you make this guy like really vicious. This is how you make a guy who like even Space Ghost is scared of.
Yeah.
And so we're doing that with all the villains. And then we've got a few more coming that I'm very excited for people to see. I just put in a lettering pass for Moltar. Creature King is a really fun issue coming up as well. And I'll leave you guys to process of elimination of who I'll be writing next. But yeah, it's the villains are really top shelf. And if anything, it was a challenge to figure out, okay, who are the villains that I know I have to use? And then who are some that I can kind of have show up in more of a cameo setting. And then there are a few that are in my back pocket in case we decide to extend the book. But yeah, Alex Toth, he really left us like a whole treasure chest full of amazing characters and concepts and designs. And it's been a real honor to be able to put our spin on them.
No, absolutely. And I think that's been one of the highlights of the issue so far, has been the villains popping up and the villains taking center stage. And that in itself is what's allowed, we talked about the stories going in different directions and different things happening. I think the villains being the focus has been the thing that allowed that. Like you said, it's like you're not going to have this drag out fight with the Widow.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Hard to, but issue 4 just came out, so spoilers for issue 3, but to have the Widow basically say, hey, you help me get this information, I'll help you, and to break into Robocore, that actually turns out, oh yeah, by the way, I'm double crossing you and I'm going to try and take Jan as well. And it's all these like mind games and this thought process and this setup that's been put into place, and it's like, and it's completely different than, like you said, fighting, the corrupt cops in issue 1, or is taken to a whole other level in issue 4 when Dokar shows up, and he's this out and out like psychopathic zealot who there is no reasoning with him. There is no changing his mind on his path. Like, you can't stop him otherwise. And then even just the detail of like Space Ghost only beat him last time by sheer luck. Like, I fought him for hours and only sheer luck did I overcome him, was like a line you'd put in there. And it was like, oh, this guy being out is bad. This is very bad.
Yeah. It's funny. That was, Warner Brothers have been amazing partners in this book. They are miles away the best licensor I've ever worked with. They've only given me, I think, 3 or 4 notes for the whole series so far.
Wow.
But it's funny that line that you mentioned was one of the handful of notes that they've given me. It was only a slight tweak, but I think I had written originally, it's like we spent hours tearing chunks out of each other, and they were like, "Can you step that one line back a little bit?" But yeah, the idea that
maybe remove the chunks.
we removed the chunks. That was something that Jonathan Lau and I talked a lot about when Jonathan was doing a design pass on Zorak. We went through a number of iterations on that character, but Jonathan and Joe Rybant and I were like really adamant. We're like, we have to stick the landing on Zorak. He is Space Ghost's most iconic enemy, and if we don't get him right, the fans are gonna rightly revolt.
Mm-hmm.
And so, something I talked about with Jonathan was that like he's a little like the Joker in the sense that like he's not like super strong. It's not like he's got like any inherent gifts or weapons of any kind that could make him a problem for Space Ghost. It's just he's that crazy, and he's that vicious, and his mind works in ways that Space Ghost just can't understand.
Yeah,
we had talked about at one point. There was earlier iteration of Zorak that had like the praying mantis blades in his arms, and they were really like these long hook-like arms, and Zorak himself was pretty ripped, and that was sort of an early iteration. And Joe and I were like, well, no, let's not make him like. We shouldn't make him physically imposing. Like, this is just a guy who like he's scary. Like, let's play up the prison suit. And we'll play up like Jonathan was the one that has done some really cool stuff with Zorak's eyes. But as after we had that conversation, I remember Jonathan sending us the updated design of Zorak in his prison suit, and I just remember being like so blown away. I was like, "This is it. This is the guy." And seeing the way that Jonathan and Andrew Dahlhaus, our colorist, have kind of tackled all this. I mean, the coolest thing about this book is every issue looks better than the one that came before it. This is a team that's really like hitting their stride, and seeing. I mean, I'm 2 issues ahead of you guys right now, so I know what 5 and 6 look like, and I'm just like blown away. And so seeing the way that everybody's kind of keeps raising the bar every issue, it puts pressure on me in a good way. That I'm like, okay, well, if I ever thought I was going to take a breather, that's just not happening. I have to make sure that I'm raising the bar too. But that Zorak design, it's the perfect update, and Jonathan just really nailed it out of the park.
Absolutely, he did.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I think that was the thing that really stood out to me from that issue, was like it was literally like the first 2 pages. Like, not that the rest of the book isn't phenomenal, but those first 2 pages were like, I was sold for whatever came after them.
Thank you.
The broken prison, and just that shot of him looking over his shoulder, and then the next image of him like full on menacing, blade in hand, like going for a guard. It was like, oh my goodness, this guy's terrifying. Like this is and like you said, he's not physically imposing in any way. He doesn't look like this buff dude who's been in the gym, and
Yeah.
he looks like a what you can stick figure, like you consider a praying mantis to look like. But oh my goodness, he's terrifying, and a lot of that comes down to, like you said, the eyes that Jonathan Law gave him. Like
Yeah.
he's somehow managed to capture conviction in the eyes of like the. It's like he comes at you with that blade. You're thinking, "I'm dead. There's nothing I can do here. I'm dead."
I kept thinking of Charles Manson. Just like that's a guy you see photos of him, and like there's like of like menace and evil, and that's a guy who, like, if you're in the same room as that guy, like, you'd be, you know, you'd be shitting your pants. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's just that's the sort of vibe that we were trying to go for.
Absolutely.
With Zorak is just like, oh man, like the only person that the only people that feel at home with this guy are his like brainwashed cult followers. That they're all just like they're all people from the same prison as him. That he's just he's built this sort of this messianic cult of personality where they're all just waiting for the day that Lokar shows up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jonathan really understood the assignment on that one.
Oh yeah,
and yeah, seeing how those characters all came together. It's a nice counterpoint also, because Space Ghost, like you said, Space Ghost is a beast. Like, and that's one of my favorite things that Jonathan has added to the equation is, Alex Toth's Space Ghost, very streamlined. Whereas like Jonathan drew him, like that guy will wreck you. That guy is like a Jack Reacher in a cape. And then meanwhile you have the kids who, very, innocent and fun, and then you've got this like gaggle of freaks and Zorak who are like taking over this facility. And I remember asking when the pages came in, I remember asking my editor, I was like, we're not pushing it too hard with these inmates, right? I hadn't really given Jonathan a ton of direction on how the inmates would look. I was just like, his cult followers from prison, and I see these guys, and I'm like, they're scary looking. And but so far, people seem to be keen on it. But yeah, that was such a yes. That was the one and only time I was ever worried if we were pushing the envelope too hard.
I do have a question that I need to ask, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, okay, I'm making a note of this. I'm going to ask David. I need to know whose idea it was to put a possible, you don't need to confirm, cameo from a Sorcerer Supreme.
Oh yeah, he's
in episode number 3.
So interesting that you ask about Dr. Abal. He will factor in fairly heavily as the series progresses. It's interesting. Abal is actually a villain from Space Ghost. He's like a Z-list villain.
Gotcha.
But he's one that I think fits. He fit the mold of exactly what I need him to do by the end of this series. And so, Jonathan, that was all his redesign. Lord Abal, that was his name in the original cartoons, had more of like a space priest kind of thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to kind of reimagine him as like our Lex Luthor. A bit for the series. But that design was all Jonathan.
I think Jonathan's angling for a Doctor Strange book in the future. I'm just saying, like,
listen,
he's got the white streaks at the side, the high collar,
Strange is my bucket list Marvel character, and I tell every Marvel editor that.
Oh, that's awesome.
But that design was all Jonathan, and I think the only direction that I had given from him was I was like, okay, rather than him being, he looks a little bit like a wild and woolly space priest in the cartoons, and I was like, I just want to clean him up. Like this guy is a billionaire. Yeah. This guy is sort of our face behind RoboCorps, because I wanted to make sure that was sort of an overarching villain for the whole series. And Yeah, it was fun seeing the way that Jonathan imagined him. But yes, we'll see more of Ibal. I think he pops up again in issue 6. So we'll see him a little bit again there, and then I'm trying to remember where he shows up next. I don't remember if he shows up in 9 or not. If not, he certainly shows up in 10.
So I'm interested in the amount of, because you had mentioned it a little bit before, but I'm interested in the amount of creative freedom, both from a writing perspective and then like a design perspective that
Yeah.
like a company that Dynamite would give you with like like a legacy character like Space Ghost. That's very interesting to me. Like when you came to the table, they were like free ball, you can do anything you want kind of
Pretty
deal,
much.
or were there like guidelines?
I think the only thing I was told was we don't want to make this like an R-rated Space Ghost, which was fine. I didn't really have any interest in
Yeah,
in doing. Um, and I was told that I was like, just to double check, confirm we're not looking to do the talk show, right? And they're like, no, we're like this will be a superhero thing. But beyond that, honestly, I've had a frankly insane amount of latitude. Dynamite and Warner Brothers have really kind of let us take the ball and roll and run with it. When I say I've only had, I think 3 or 4 notes from Warner Brothers in the entire process, and they've been small edits. It's, can we tweak this line, or
yeah,
that page with Zorak, where we reveal Zorak. We were just asked to make sure that the blood was a silhouette rather than having like a bright red splash of blood. Um,
got
I
it.
think I wouldn't even call it a material edit. It was me asking if they wanted this, and they said no thanks. Was I had asked if they wanted Jan and Jace to have superhero code names or not, and that was the only thing. They were like, let's just leave it because it's simpler without it. But otherwise, I mean,
Yeah,
they've let me do just about everything. The very small handful of notes I've seen from them, the majority of them are just enthusiastic. They're just like, yeah, oh yeah, I can't wait to see this, or yeah, that rules. Like,
it's awesome.
and that's not. I'm not used to that from licensors. I've worked with other licensors before,
Yeah,
and they are usually they sort of see themselves as the guardrails. They want to make sure that their characters are told, in a way that fits within their general plans and, and,
Hmm.
and their general paradigm for the characters. There can be
yeah,
a degree of protectiveness, and it makes perfect sense. I think for Space Ghost, like they've just been like, what do you think is the biggest swing you can take? Which has been really lovely.
so
It's
cool.
been a lot of fun to work with. And so, yeah, it helps that I tend to plan in advance. I always say I'm a
Hmm.
slow outliner, but that's because when I finish the outline, the thing's done. There's very little in the way of guesswork. There's,
Yeah,
hopefully, knock wood, very little in the way of alterations I need to make. Um, when I pitched this to Dynamite, I think my pitch was like 35 pages. um, like the whole series. And I had very detailed treatments of every single issue. So that way, like Warner Brothers knew that like I had a plan, and also just there were no surprises. They knew exactly
yeah,
what was going to happen. I wrote character bios on each of the heroes and any of the villains I was planning on using, and sort of giving kind of my ideas of how we could introduce them. And so yeah, I think that's really helped in that Warner Brothers doesn't have to worry about us. They know I'm not gonna like go off
yeah, yeah,
book
yeah.
on this because I've already I thought this stuff through. I think I turned in my outline. Well, let's see. Dynamite approached me at New York Comic Con, and I turned in my outline shortly before Thanksgiving.
Oh wow.
So
Yeah.
it was like 5 or 6 weeks.
I'm gonna say, yeah, that's not a long turnaround at all to get that to them.
Of that one I was moving, I think, fairly fast for me. Um, but yeah, they've been really great to work with. The amount of freedom that I've had in terms of writing, I mean, I think it's been a good dynamic with me and Joe Rybant and Warner Brothers, is they kind of let me do my thing. And so yeah, I feel like I'm 8 issues in and haven't had really any sort of pushback. And yeah, as far as the designs go, a lot of it's we try to trust Jonathan. Jonathan is sort of
Mhm.
uh, he's the one realizing all of this stuff. He's the one sort of putting his own twists on things. And so that's been like a fun dynamic that I've had with him, is that I'll write something and then Jonathan will take his twist on it, which is always better. And then I'll sort of take my script and figure out, like, okay, like now that I see the way that Jonathan has imagined this, how do I kind of tweak the dialogue to match it? There
Yeah.
have been a few characters we've had back and forths on. Zorak, I think, was the big one, just because there were a lot of places we could go. I'm sure. I'm sure we Brack and Sisto came a little quickly. Based on the timing of how we put our first issue together, we wanted to have a teaser ready for Comics Pro. So that first half of issue 1, we like hit the ground running. Like it was one of those. Joe and I were talking about artists for the book. Jonathan Lau's name came up. I said, that's the guy. I want to work with him. And like by the next week, Jonathan was like drawing issue 1.
Oh wow!
It was really like, yeah, it was. So that one we didn't have as much back and forth. Yeah, there wasn't as much back and forth with Brack and Sisto, just because we were hitting the ground running. But I'll leave ideas in the character descriptions if anything pops up. Like the Widow, it was subtle, but I think important. I had talked about making her more of like a Kate Blanchett
Mm.
figure.
Okay.
That was, I talked about her, Kate Blanchett's Hela as like a as
Oh
a,
yeah,
a
yeah,
big
yeah.
influence.
Yeah, I can definitely see
And
that.
Jonathan really
The
ran with
headdress
that.
and everything.
Yeah, like I can say, I'll give you guys a little exclusive. Like, Creature King is coming up in issue 7. And I referred to him as I said he's a little bit of a Napoleonic figure. I said, imagine Caesar from Rise of the Planet of the Apes meets Colonel Kurtz, um, from like Apocalypse Now. And so I'm very interested to see how Jonathan takes that
See how he
cue.
interprets that into putting them into the book.
Yeah, you know. Uh, but some of these characters, like there's very little. Like I know, like Moltar, for example. There was no update needed on Moltar. Jonathan did a pretty faithful take on the character, but I do love the way that he played up that like Moltar's a big guy.
Mm.
And that's something that's, I think, a little striking in the in the original cartoons, is you're like, oh, like Moltar's a big boy too. Um, But yeah, I think honestly the big thing I think was Jan and Jace, and that was, I think, the
Yeah.
reason why this book's been in such good hands, is that Jonathan. I had said, listen, like they're teenagers, but let's like keep them on the younger side of teenagers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I envision them as like 14. And Jonathan really honored that. And I think that's the reason why this book has worked, is that it'd be so easy to put these kids in the background. It'd be so easy to treat them as accessories to Space Ghost. It'd be so easy to show them as what they look like adults. And
Yeah.
I think the fact that like Jonathan has, really honored that request of mine, that these are kids.
Yeah.
They're kids that have a lot of growing up to do. They have a lot to learn. That I think has been our secret ingredient from the jump. Is that like, yeah, this is a big, larger than life, kind of intense, sometimes a little bit of a scary world. You got these two kids that leaven the whole thing, that keep it from being too dark, that keep it from feeling too overwrought or oppressive. Is because, like, how bad can it be when you've got Jan and Jason Blip joking around? And so, yeah, thankfully that wasn't something that I had a whole lot of discussion with Jonathan on, other than saying, here's Tim and Lex from Jurassic Park. But Jonathan, it's the single best creative choice I think he's made in the entire book.
Yeah.
That's such a good callback though to Grant and Tim and Lex though, because I can 100% see that now that you said it.
Oh, absolutely.
It makes
Yeah.
total sense to me.
Yeah.
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 And a lot of times when you see kids in comics and stuff like that, or just in literature in general, they're just kind of like you said, like side characters. They don't really make an impact in the story. And one thing that really stuck out to me is they're capable. Like
Yeah.
they can get
Yeah.
stuff done. Yeah, it was really cool to see.
Yeah.
It's like a really cool change of pace.
I was
Yeah,
going to say, yeah, issue 3, Jan literally saves the day and literally saves Space Ghost and
Yeah.
Jace.
Yeah, when I wrote my character bios for all of them, I wanted to make sure everybody had their own skill sets, and I was like, Jan's the responsible one. She has to be a little more mature. She has to be a little more thoughtful because like she's the only girl, and I think even before her father was killed, I think she had to be more thoughtful. You know, her dad was like the absent-minded professor. And I remember thinking, okay, she's the sharpshooter. She's the one who, like, you give her a blaster, she knows what to do. Jace, I was like, Jace is like the impulsive one. He's the youngest of the twins, and he's got some strong ADD energy. I'd written in my bio that I was like, he's probably not great at school. He's not good in like a traditional school environment, but
Yeah.
like if it's something he can do with his hands, he's really good at it. You know, he's the mechanic.
Definitely
He's
get
the
that vibe
pilot.
from him. Yeah.
Him, Jace stealing the Phantom Cruiser was like one of the first ideas I came up with for the
that
whole
was
series.
hilarious.
Love that
I part.
just to like show that like he is capable in his own way, and to show that like he's not going to sit around on the sidelines.
Yeah.
And you see it a little bit in issue 4 as well, where like Jan's like, oh man, what do we do? Space, we can't reach Space Ghost, and there's like a hostage situation going on, and Jace is like, well, we gotta spring into action. Like,
Yeah.
he's the one who was mad about getting benched in the first place. Jan and Jace are very much like a yin and yang to one another, but I wanted to make sure that they had their own skill sets, that this was very much an equal opportunity rescue situation. That like there are times where Space Ghost is going to be in the wrong place, and it's going to require those kids to bail him out,
Yeah.
and vice versa. You see it down in issue 4 where, spoilers, but Jan and Jace are in the lion's den,
Yeah.
and how are they going to get out of this one?
But that's awesome though, because like you said as well, like talking about humanizing Space Ghost, it humanizes him as well. Like he isn't the gung ho hero that he probably would have been in the original cartoon. Like, aha, I'll come in at the last minute to save the day. Like, no, again, spoilers for issue 4, but not only is he not in the right place at the right time, he's on a different freaking planet from them.
Yeah.
He's dealing with something completely elsewhere, and it's like they get fully separated, and it's like, so there is a very human element to that of like, but it's not even like it's not even like it was a wrong call. It was the decision he was making at the time to try and do the right thing,
that's something that I think was a big part of issue 4. It's like everybody's just trying to do the right thing. It's not about ego. It's not about it's not about anybody being stupid. It's very much just like, all right, there are two bad things going on in two different places. If the choice is possibly get into trouble but do the right thing, we'll do that 10 times out of 10 rather than just sit in our hands.
Yeah.
But I think there's a degree of, when you have kids, like it's your heart running around on the outside. And I think in the same way that like Superman doesn't really have like a lot of weaknesses outside of kryptonite, he's got Lois, he's got John, he's got Jimmy, he's got the Daily Planet. It's the people around him that are Superman's biggest weakness, and that's the case with Space Ghost. Is if it's just a fair fight, like Space Ghost will win most times, but the kids are his weakness now. They're his greatest strength and his greatest weakness, and that's I think the fun bit of tension to him as a character is that like he's a grouch. He protects these kids, but he's kind of a grouch about it. But also, like, as the series progresses, he's going to love those kids with his whole heart. And I think there's something inherently noble about that character that I think transcends any rough edges he might have, is that he knows instinctively bringing these kids into his life is going to be enormously destabilizing. It's going to be more than just a hassle. It's going to be kind of like a little subconsciously painful for him. It's going to remind him of everything that he's lost, and it's also going to remind him, I think, subconsciously of like the arrested development that he's been in all these years, that he hasn't moved on. But he does it anyway. He knows that these kids are as good as dead if they're not with him. And I think that is what speaks to Space Ghost as a hero, is it's not about him punching out bad guys. It's about him stepping up as the surrogate father figure to these two kids who desperately need him.
Yeah.
One of the things that really stuck out to me, I can't remember which issue it was. I think it might have been 2, but he's at like the command center in his ship, and the kids like are coming up to him and talking to him, and he just slams his fist down. Like, you have this stoic, like, Space Ghost, just badass dude, and then he just loses it. And I just thought that was a really cool way to build tension in the relationship. And he, kind of immediately cools down and addresses what they were trying to say. But that was like a cool way to draw the reader in with the dynamic between those three. It was really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, that whole sequence. I mean, issue 2. I mean, I love all of those issues, but I think that sequence in issue 2 is still one of my favorites.
Yeah.
In the whole series. Yeah, just like I think that's a microcosm of the whole series. Is it's just like all Space Ghost wants to do is find out when the asteroid field's going to hit.
Yeah.
So he can take care of it. And meanwhile, he's got 2 kids who are like asking him very reasonable requests. It's just spoiled rations are not going to cut it for us. Like, we need to be able to eat like normal food. He's like, he immediately is like, this sucks. This is the worst. But these kids like kind of grow on him. And that's sort of that's I think a joy of this book, is sort of, we keep ratcheting that relationship up. In every issue, but it's not always going to be up. There's going to be some times where they take 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and I think those issues are going to be just as interesting. It's going to really kind of test that dynamic. I talk about it a lot with my other books, and I think it's something that I always try to bring. I call it the redemptive climb, where I love starting characters in a really bad spot. Spencer and Locke, is probably the bleakest thing I've ever written. And like that starts off real dark. You see it with the OZ, you see it with Savage Avengers, you see it with Space Ghost, where these are all people who like are pretty rough around the edges. They've kind of been consumed by their own demons for a while. And for me, that just means they've got nowhere to go but up. And that's where like I always ask people, just be patient with the book. They're not going to be this bad forever. And I think that's the case for Space Ghost, is while he's like a terror to any sort of pirates or criminals out there, ultimately like there's a marshmallow center to him that I'm excited to kind of keep drawing out as the series progresses.
Hey there, Comic Clan. Did you know that Comics in the Cross are now over on Patreon? For as little as $2 a month, you can get early access to all of our YouTube reviews on comics, video games, and tabletop gaming days before they go live on YouTube, as well as access to our Indie Comic Book Club a whole month before it goes live on YouTube for the public to see. You can also get access to exclusive content specifically for Patreon supporters, including watch-alongs, reaction content, and of course special one-off podcasts that we do every so often. You'll also get access to behind the scenes goings on at Comics in the Cross and hear about all the stuff that we get up to and all the things that are going into the behind the scenes operations. If you're not able to support us over on Patreon, please don't feel obligated to do so, and please don't feel like that'll stop you getting our content. We'll still produce all the same content that we have done so far for Twitch and YouTube, and it'll be open to the public as regular. But if you enjoy the content you get here and feel like you want to support us, please head on over to patreon.com/comicsinthecross and help us out over there. Thank you so much for all your love and all your support so far. I hope you have an absolutely amazing day. Take care, and remember, it's a good week. Well, to kind of talk as well about, you said like starting characters in a dark place, it was a question I kind of wanted to ask as well with that, because Space Ghost himself is, is a stoic badass, but he is very much personally in a bad place. And in issue 2, we get very much a hint at his backstory. Does something happen to what we don't get it confirmed, but it looks like something happened to his family. We even get the mention of a real name for Space Ghost, and I'm like, I wanted to ask you, like, because I've got no previous knowledge of Space Ghost beyond this series. I didn't see the original or anything. How much of that is actual backstory that was there, and how much of it was created for this, and how much freedom did you have with that? Because it's one thing to change, okay, we're going to take the Mantis and we're going to turn him into a psycho cult leader. It's another thing to go, here's our hero and this is his actual backstory now. This is his canon backstory as far as people are concerned. Like, how did that go, and what was the freedom around that?
That was purely created for this series. Warner Brothers gave me complete freedom as far as that was concerned. Even picking a name for Space Ghost, because Space Ghost, he's had multiple names over the years, and for me, I wanted to kind of make a conscious break that, like, this is its own thing. We're not beholden to anybody else's continuity. Both, like, the pragmatic sense of, I don't want anybody to feel like they have to do homework to get this book.
Yeah.
But also just the ethics of it all, where I was like, I don't feel right drawing from like another publisher's continuity. And so I wanted to make sure that that it was a clean break, that this is like brand new, like it's its own thing. What I'll say is, I wanted to give Space Ghost kind of a complementary tragedy to Jan and Jace. Jan and Jace in issue 1, they lose a father. And Space Ghost, meanwhile, we see by issue 2, he's lost a family. And so you can see kind of how these pieces slot together pretty organically. But without spoiling too much, and we've kind of teased it in tiny bits and pieces, this is something that we will be revisiting in future issues. You see it a little bit in issue 3, where the widow says, like, I'm surprised you've had time to pick up children, given your hunt for the Iron General. And so we'll get to see who that is.
Oh, nice.
Down the line. But suffice to say, this is definitely a thread that we will be picking back up in the issue. In fact, I'll even go so far as to say I'm writing those scripts now. Nice. Because I feel like we're able to, I know people say that Space Ghost is Batman in space, and that's a convenient shorthand, but I do think that my favorite part about Space Ghost is Batman has to be built in a way that makes him last 700, 800,000 issues, That's what, it often puts him into this sort of illusion of change, where you can only kind of mess with the formula so much before it eventually kind of the inertia brings him back to center.
Yeah.
That's not the case with Space Ghost. For Space Ghost, we can have genuine change. We can have actual payoff to some of these things, because he's not designed that he doesn't have to last 600 issues. Right now I'm writing him for just over a year. And so I know that we will have a distinct beginning, middle, and end for that character. That origin, it's important. It's something we will be revisiting. Nice. And we'll be revisiting it in a really cool and satisfying way. The issues 5. No, it's issues 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, these all feel like payoffs. Those issues all feel like payoffs in really cool ways, for all this stuff that we've been sort of introducing quietly in the first half of the series. And so, yeah, it's very exciting to me. It makes each of those issues a little daunting in a way, because you want to make sure that you're hitting the emotional beats. But yeah, it's I think it's going to turn out in a really cool way. I'm trying to write this as sort of my Batman: The Long Halloween, but we're doing it with all these characters that nobody really knows about, and so we're able to kind of reimagine them. And so yeah, that origin story was like kind of a part of it. It was just me asking myself, well, like, why is this guy doing this? Why is this guy in a bad place? Why is this guy a crime fighter? And I know it's a trope of having like a dead family, and I'm sure some of that was me coming off of writing a Punisher book, where I think having a dead family is like a staple of being a Punisher. But I think it's an emotional. It's all emotional. It makes his crusade feel that much more engaging, and it makes his journey feel that much more organic. Is that he had to lose something, and that's why he's going around in a cape and a mask and calling himself Space Ghost. Is that, like, deep down it still hurts. It's it's pain that's molten, that he is just like pushed way down, and it comes out in kind of these outbursts of anger. But he's on the healing journey now. That's what those kids are there for. And it'll be nice and cathartic by the time this series wraps up.
Hearing you talk about like the ability to kind of show change in a comic format is really cool, because that's something that Cross and I have talked about quite a bit. That's one of the reasons that we kind of got into indie comics a little bit. Is because, like, with indie comics, there's a beginning and there's an end, and that's it. That's the story. And it's kind of cool being able to do that with like an established character like Space Ghost, because you hear the old adage, superheroes never die, really. Like, they always come back in some form or shape. So that's really cool that you get to do that with like that type of established character. It's really cool.
Thank you. I think the cool thing about him is, I just wrote the foreword for the first trade paperback for Space Ghost. And the thing that really has appealed to me is this is a character whose greatest superpower is reinvention. That he's always kind of reflected the times. He emerges in 1966 as a Silver Age hero, an answer to Adam West's Batman. He comes back in the 80s. He's standing shoulder to shoulder with the Super Friends and Spider-Man and his Amazing Friends in his revival. The MTV generation claims him, and he becomes this like comedy defining talk show host for the MTV generation. It's just pure irony. He comes back with Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti, and like I said, he's actually a precursor to the Batman Begins zeitgeist. And then you see him in 2017, and this is sort of the era where the shared universes are the thing. And so you see him in Future Quest as sort of this big Hanna-Barbera jam band. And so now it's sort of the year 2024. How do we, what's the Ultimates, version of Space Ghost? Where we take the character seriously, and we just tell the biggest sweeping epic story we can. And people not knowing who Space Ghost is has honestly been to our advantage, is because we can say, you don't have to read anything, you don't have to watch anything. All you have to do is read the book, and we'll guide you through this universe, and we'll show you why Space Ghost is the greatest superhero in the galaxy.
Absolutely. And from all the responses that I've seen online to the book as well, it seems like you're doing a great job of that. Everyone seems to praise the book online. I've not seen any real negative responses or anything. I'm sure they're out there. There always are. But I've seen
I've
a
been
lot
very
of great
fortunate
responses.
really the vast majority of people have really enjoyed the book. I can probably count on one hand the number of people I've seen who've had anything to say, and of course there are going to be some people who just like any book that I've done, they won't like it on principle. I know there are some people who have been diehard coast to coast fans who they're not interested in a traditional superhero take, and um, and it's completely valid. I will say, like, I felt so fortunate that I've been able to strike up a correspondence with Andy Merrill, the voice of Brack, and really the guy who kind of carried Space Ghost's name into the modern age with Coast to Coast. And the fact that Andy has been so supportive of the book has been such an honor.
That's
He's
amazing.
such a lovely guy.
That's really cool.
And but yeah, I think anybody who's like read the book in good faith, they've had nothing but great things to say about it, and it's been nice to hear from the retailers too. I've heard from so many retailers who have said that they've been selling a lot of Space Coast, which is lovely to hear. Um, and yeah, I mean, it takes a village for any book to succeed. You need really a confluence of the creative team. You need your publisher to help. You need fans to kind of go out there and support. You need press to talk about you. You need the retailers to buy the damn books. And I really feel like we've got like this coalition that's come together for Space Ghost, and for it being a book that is not a big two book. It's a superhero book outside the big two. To see the groundswell of support that we've gotten, it's very heartening. It also reinforces that I'll never shut up about this book. But I yeah, it's the whole experience has been a gift. And it's definitely, this is one of the books I haven't had this much fun or been this proud of a book since. Well, I was gonna say Savage Avengers, and then I remember about Devil That Wears My Face. But I feel like this feels, I'm just as proud of this book as I was of those other two.
That's awesome.
And yeah, and so yes, I'm excited to keep writing it, and hopefully everybody else will keep reading it.
Awesome. All right, so I do have to ask one thing about upcoming issues, and feel free to completely ignore me what you can explore. But with all the talk of the villains that are coming back, with all the talks of everything, and you're talking about all these payoffs that are coming up, and you've got 12 issues in an annual, by the end of the series, will we see the Council of Doom forming?
Yes.
You have it here, exclusive Council of Doom is coming. Yes.
Yes. I wouldn't have introduced all of them if I wasn't planning on putting them all together.
See, I was curious because there were so many getting introduced, but I'm like, but you've only got 12 issues, and I'm like, is there enough room to get to that and tell it, or are we going to?
It is.
Or is this like cliffhanger? Like, you can give me more than 12 issues. I've got another story in me. So
no. We will have the Council of Doom. They've got pretty good runway. Yes. Well, I can say I've already written 5 out of the 6, and I'm in the middle of writing the 6th. So yes, it'll be really fun to put all them together. It's something that I've wanted to write for a long time as a supervillain team, and we got really close to doing it in Savage Avengers. That was without spoiling anything. I had pitched a 3rd arc featuring a supervillain team. Editors really liked it, but just the state of the market. There are a lot of books. They were wrapping up on a lot of books, and so we wrapped up at the original 10. So I'm very excited. That's going to be like a fun challenge to give all those characters like the page real estate. But yeah, I'm very excited to be writing all of those.
That's going to be fun to see all of them interacting, especially the way you've written them. That's going to be really fun interactions to read.
Yes. Yes. So So, but some of these villains are gonna they're well, for all of them, this is gonna be a round 2, and some of them are gonna be leaving round 1 a little more scathed than others. Um, so yes, we'll just say that they're coming for their rematch, good and ticked. So yeah, that'll be really fun. But yeah, we've got some fun stuff coming before the Council of Doom, and there's a couple other villains that I'm kind of keeping in the back pocket that will be
Nice.
showing up that are going to be very cool. So yes, stay tuned. Some real fun stuff to come. I guess I've written what I would consider this the first 2/3 of the series, I guess. And so now I'm sort of writing kind of the big crescendo of this first year. I'm starting that now, and so yeah, some big moments coming. Big moments coming for everybody.
Ooh, I'm hyped. I'm looking forward to this.
Give me super right.
I was already excited for the book, but I'm really excited now. We actually get to the
Yeah,
council.
it's gonna be
I
fun.
didn't know if we were going, and I'm going to ask and just see what he says. It might be I get told, yeah, I'm not telling you, but
Yeah, yeah, no, they're coming. And boy, heaven help Space Ghost. If you thought any one of those villains were difficult, they're gonna have to push themselves to the limit to fight 6.
that's going to be a fun year of reading Space Ghost. This is honestly, it's became one of my favorite books to check out.
Thank you.
We've been checking we've been getting a good few books recently, doing a lot of reviews and stuff, and but Space Ghost is still one that I make sure as soon as it hits the inbox, I'm like, okay, we're reading Space Ghost, we're getting the review out for this one. I need to get into it. It's still top of the
Thank you.
list all the time.
I appreciate you guys reading it. Yeah, this book's been a labor of love. It's funny. This book, the production of it has been in a lot of ways very different than most of my other books because Jonathan Lau is the fastest artist I've ever worked with.
Yeah.
He's faster than Carlos Magno used to hold the crown for Savage Avengers, but Jonathan can wrap up an issue like faster than a monthly schedule,
Oh
which means I
wow.
write the book even faster than that. I was
Art
talking
is
with,
incredible.
yeah,
It's
I mean the fact
incredible.
that
The energy that he's able to produce is crazy.
the fact that he does all that and he draws that fast, it's like holy shit.
Yeah, the
But yeah,
he's good. He is really good.
Yeah.
he's very talented. It means that the speed that I write is much faster than usual. But yeah, I was talking with Taylor Esposito, our letterer. He's about to start lettering issue 6 right now. And he was like, "Oh, thanks again for you and Jonathan being so far ahead of schedule." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. Like we haven't even sent issue 5 to the printer yet, and we're already doing a lettering pass on 6. That's like fairly unheard of for like licensed books, at least in my experience. So yeah, the fact that we're like as far ahead as we are, um, it's good. It's a little bit of pressure, but
Yeah.
it's very good.
That's awesome, though. That is awesome. And you have massive, praise not just to yourself, but to the team you've got working on this book with you. They all do a
Yes.
phenomenal job. Jonathan, Andrew, and Taylor are all amazing at what they do, and all of it comes together
Yeah, it's
so
a
beautifully
top-shelf
in
crew.
this.
Yeah, no, they've been great. I mean, I've been a fan of Jonathan's since his work on Green Hornet like 15 years ago with Kevin Smith. So when Joe Rybandt mentioned him as someone who could possibly draw the book, I immediately kind of latched onto that, and I was like, yeah, it's got to be him. And I'd worked with Andrew on a 5-page short story at Marvel. It was a Miles Morales short story, in Carnage Reigns, and I was so blown away by his work. And Jonathan had actually brought Andrew onto the team by his request, and um, they're a really they're a dynamic duo. They work really well together. Andrew, in particular, is so wonderfully enthusiastic about the work. He's DM me pages before he sends them to our editors.
That's awesome.
Particularly issue 3, I remember him sending me like that intro sequence before the widow shows up. And he's like, "Oh man, it's so much fun! Like doing all the neon lights is super fun." And just a lovely guy and a very talented collaborator. And Taylor is a wonderful guy. I owe him my career. Actually, Taylor was the one who introduced me to the late Jason Smith, who was my very first colorist that I worked on with Spencer and Locke. And so, if Taylor hadn't made that introduction, I wouldn't be here. So,
wow.
And Taylor and I had this is the first collaboration we've done together that's seen the light of day. We worked on a 2-page anthology story for an anthology that we did it years ago, and it still hasn't seen the light of day yet. But it's one of those things we've been meaning to work together for a long time. And so when Joe said, "Okay, we're going to bring Taylor on," I was like, "Oh, fantastic! We've known each other for many years, and he's so thoughtful with everything." And really like takes great pains to like make sure the page flows nicely. And so yeah, it's just been a great crew. And Joe has kind of been the one herding all the cats, to make sure that everything is going out on time. So yeah, it's been a great crew. Dynamite's been wonderful to work with. They've been very supportive of the book. And so yeah, we're already kind of talking about what's next.
Nice.
So they've been a good group and very fun to work with.
That's so cool.
That's awesome. Just kind of like as a last little kind of wrap up bit, unless you had any more questions about Space Ghost specifically, Nitro. I want to just kind of.
No, I think we covered most everything. Yeah.
I want to just kind of ask about a couple other things, just quick fire. I know we've been talking about Space Ghost longer than I was expecting to, because we just got into it, which is amazing. I am absolutely not complaining in the slightest. It was amazing. But I want to just talk on, because you've been doing a bunch of other projects as well. One of the other ones that you, obviously we mentioned it a couple of times, was The Devil That Wears My Face, that we did with Mad Cave, who we're very big fans of the stuff going over there, and that's one of the phenomenal books that's came out recently.
Thank you.
What led you into doing that, and is there a plan to go back into the kind of horror stuff at any point? Because that was obviously a delve deep into the horror world and the horror genre. Is that what took you down that path? Was it just the, like you said, the ADD brain of like that? Oh, I want to write some horror, so we're going to go that path, or was
a little bit? Every time I write a book, I have like a to-do list, of stuff that I would like to write before I die. And inevitably, every time I write a book, I check a few of those things off. Then I invariably have added a bunch more things. Like if I write a crime book, whatever I write next, I want to be not at all crime related. I want to like cleanse the palate creatively. And I had come to the point I'd been thinking for a long time, like, I got to do a horror book. That feels like the food group that I've been missing. I've written crime, I've written fantasy, I was writing superheroes at the time. I was writing Savage Avengers. I had written sci-fi, although it hasn't seen the light of day yet. But like, I'd written a book called Grand Theft Auto, and then obviously my superhero stuff, like Savage Avengers, was a time travel story.
Yeah, hold on a little second, David. Sorry, the video on the audio on my side is like kind of breaking up a little touch.
Sure.
Alright, I think we're caught up. Can you try speaking for me just to...
I had felt like I needed to hit that food group for horror. I had done superheroes, I had done crime, I had done fantasy, I had done sci-fi with a book called Grand Theft Auto that hasn't come out yet, but horror was the one I hadn't done. So also, I'm a big fan of the movie Face Off. I love Face Off. One of my favorite 90s movies. I love the body swap. That's like a cool, like, it's inherently dramatic. Like, there's very clear stakes. You have to build up two characters very, very quickly and their context, so that way you can effectively swamp them out. And so the way that the devil came to be was
Hi there,
Likes
folks. If you're watching on YouTube, I am so sorry for some of the cuts here. We were having a little bit of a technical issue, and I wanted to make sure to catch this part of the conversation for you. So we've rebooted, restarted. David has been very gracious to wait as my computer had a mind fart, and we're back. So, David, thank you so much for sticking with us. So,
Yeah, man.
of course.
Appreciate it.
but yeah, so you're
It's
talking
my pleasure.
Devil That Wears My Face, got approached for the book. Horror was the genre you wanted to hit that you hadn't hit yet.
Mark London and Chris Fernandez at Mad Cave, they've been big supporters of my work for many years. And yeah, they came up to me at New York Comic Con, I guess it was 2 or 3 years ago now. And they said, we really want to work with you. We're expanding the creator-owned, the original line. So, so we talked about some ideas, and we very quickly kind of came across Devil, this idea of like doing a supernatural version of the Face Off body swap story. And that book, it took some time to put together. I had written at least the first 2 issues, maybe even the first 3, before we got Alex Cormick on board. And I've been friendly with Alex for a long time. I've been a huge fan of his work since his work on Sync over at Comics Tribe. And I've been trying to approach him to do other projects, and we never could find the right one. And I said, hey, so this project, Devil Wears My Face, we have a publisher for it, or do you want in? And I didn't know that Alex was a big fan of like Errol Flynn and things like that. And he immediately was like, yes, I want in on this. And Alex is one of the most talented and gracious collaborators I've ever had the good fortune to work with. Just a lovely guy. He has a background in animation. You can see it in the way that he draws characters, the body language, and the acting. He really took what I brought in the script and really elevated it by all the amazing creative choices that he made. And so Alex and I, certain collaborators, they don't want a ton of back and forth, or they'll sort of turn in their thing, and you kind of sort of pick your battles of what you want to discuss. Alex and I were like in-depth conversations, like page to page, with the character designs and everything. I can't say enough good things about working with Alex. We're already sort of slowly getting the wheels turning on like the next horror book that we're going to work on together. He's just a true talent. I can't say enough great things about him. And so, Devil, my first horror book, but judging just by how proud I am of the work, it certainly won't be the last.
Oh, I hope not. It was a phenomenal book to read, and the publisher kind of like just... I got the honor of like, because you sent me the review copy of it, and I hadn't managed to kind of like read it up till that point, and I'm like, okay, so I need to pick up the book. Went and bought the other issues, and I literally just read it all back to back. And to read that from start to finish, like in that one go, was like, this is amazing. This is just a hell of a journey. And Alex's art is stunning. Like it's such a great atmospheric art, and with all the compliments in the world, which I hope is the only way it can be taken, it gave me the same feeling of when I first read Witches from Snyder and Jock.
Oh, that's kind of you.
It's like it gave me that same... There was a great ability of building atmosphere, and especially through the art, especially through Alex's art, which definitely gave me Jock vibes of that. Of he just knew how to set the tone in the art, and this kind of horror and this sort of build up to it, and the story kind of weaving through it. It was almost like your story tried to not get in the way of the art and let it do its job, and then the story would bring the pieces it needed. It was very well done. Very well done for a horror. And I'm not a massive connoisseur of horror comics. It's a genre I've tried to expand more as I've gotten more into horror. And it's like, no, that one was right up my alley. That was a phenomenal book.
One of the reasons I tackled that particular angle is my father-in-law is very into exorcism horror. He went to Catholic boys' school growing up. That's something that like genuinely like he loves it, but it scares him.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so he's been very kind and patient as far as my comics career has been concerned, even though I'm sure he doesn't understand it. But I was like, I have to write something that he'll understand, something that he'll appreciate. And so, yes, so I gave him a copy of the trade
That's
when I
awesome.
saw him during the July 4th holidays. So we'll see. We'll see. I'm seeing him next month, so we'll see if he appreciated
Okay,
it.
next time we talk with you, I
But
need to hear what you thought of the trade
yes,
and if
I'll ask him if he read it yet and see what he thinks. But yeah, I mean, and without spoiling too much, there was a little bit of by the end of it, there was sort of a little bit of a personal element on my end. You know, the twist behind that book was very much my way of justifying how do I write a book like this.
yeah.
And so yeah, yeah, I'm really proud of how that book came together. Getting to work again with Mike Martz and Christina Harrington. They were my editors on Scouts Honor back when they were at Aftershock. Mike Martz was one of my bosses during my very first internship, DC
Oh,
Comics,
wow.
back when he was an editor. So it was just the whole thing felt like a very full circle moment.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot
And
of old connections coming back for you in that one, and
yeah, you know, so much about this industry is the long game, and I feel like I'm sort of even I still feel like I'm kind of a baby at this point. But I've been knocking on this door. I graduated college in 2008, so I've been at this in some capacity for 16 years, and if you count the 3 years that it took for me to get that internship, I've really been at this for 18. I've been at this like almost half my life. And you know, it's like only now you're starting to see some of these connections starting to pop.
What's
Where
the
you're like,
what's the
oh,
old
hey,
saying? It's like 2 decades to become an overnight success. You know?
yes, yes. You know, and anybody that you see who, you know, you see them blowing up, it's taken them quite a while to get there. Even the most meteoric seeming success stories, they've been at this for a while. And so that's why like I'm always so appreciative of the people who are looking at the indie scene. Because of course, like I love Marvel and DC just like anybody else. I'm reading that stuff every week. Um, but I think it's the people who are looking at the indie scene that they're the ones helping get those indie people into the Marvels and DCs of it all. You see, you know, you see like Chris Condon, for example, great guy. That guy has been grinding it out for years. And so to see that, like, you know, that Texas Blood, and then go to, you know, the EC comics, and then going from there to Green Arrow.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, like there are going to be a lot of people who are discovering Chris just on Green Arrow, and hopefully they will then check out his image work, and check out his work at Oni. That's sort of like I think the trajectory. I mean, nobody steps onto the majors.
No.
Nobody walks onto the Yankees, is what Mike Martz told me at the beginning of my career.
Yeah.
And you know, you got to work your way up the indies and up the farm teams, and so it's the people who are following all that. Like it not only is it like a way to diversify what kind of stories you're consuming, and to be able to tell different stories that you might not be able to tell in a corporate shared universe, but also like that's how you get the churn for those big shared universes. That's how you start drawing up some of these big names, or what's the next big name. It's you see them in the indies. So yeah, it's definitely
No,
I'm always
absolutely.
very grateful to everyone who checked out all my old stuff, and hopefully will continue to check out my creator on work down the line.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think you're definitely hitting nail on the head with that. That's exactly why we started looking at indie comics. Was there was this whole untapped market, like everyone talked Marvel and DC, and I know for me personally, I started it was around about the era of like Civil War 2 and everything, and I'm like, I was just getting to the point of like, I'm bored. I've seen so many resets. I've seen so many stuff to invest in that's just reset itself. And I'm like, what else is going on in the comic industry? And it's like, Marvel and DC are like the undisputed kings. They're at the top. It's going to take a hell of a lot of anyone to dethrone them. It's not happening anytime soon. But the indie comics was like, there's a lot of great stuff happening here. We started the indie comic book club because it was like, let's look at some of these indie comics and see what they've got and see what's out there and check some of these titles out people have talked about and praised. And there are so many, like, I think I posted it on X a little while ago, as much as I hate saying X. I said,
you can say Twitter, it's fine.
Yes, it's like Twitter. It's Twitter. Everybody calls it Twitter. It's like X.
It's Twitter.
But like, I posted it on Twitter and it was like, I've never had a more hard job in my life right now than choosing the comics that we're getting sent to review. And that's just from the companies that we've got access to. We've got a few companies that we've got minimal access to that send us stuff to review, which I'm super grateful for. But even within those companies, I'm like, I can only review so many. There are so many amazing titles out there. There are so many good indie books. And I'm like, I want to read them all and I can't. I just do not have the time to sit and read and review all of these. Even just to read them in my own time, I don't have enough. There are so many great books out there right now. If you're only reading Marvel and DC, it's like you're doing yourself a disservice, really. Like, there's a lot going on. Not that you can't be fans of those and the amazing work going there, but there's a whole industry below it.
There's some great stuff out there. I can give some shout outs for a few books that I read this week.
Go for it.
The power fantasy that Kieran Gillen and Casper Wingard, that was fantastic. It felt like Watchmen meets The Good Place.
Nice. I've seen everybody talking about that one. I've seen a lot of people talking about that one.
I'm very excited for the next issue. There's The Pedestrian. By my buddies Joey Esposito and Sean Van Gorman. I describe that as like what if Richard Linklater wrote The Tick. It's sort of the ennui of living in a small town and what happens when you have like an equally kind of weird, understated superhero that suddenly kind of pops up in the midst. And when we say superhero, it's like it's stretching that term about as much as it can be stretched. I just read Big Empty Void, Big Empty Void, Big Dark Void, by Zach Kaplan and Chris Sheehan over at Ad Cave. That book is that was a stellar first issue. Really, really well made. I just read Red Before Black over at Boom with Stephanie Phillips, and I was really taken by that book. That it felt like an all women take of like classic Vertigo stories. Like it felt like it could be, in the same pantheon as like 100 Bullets.
Yeah.
And the art on it was spectacular by Goran. I can't even pronounce his last name. I feel so bad. That's just the indie books that I read today.
Yeah.
There's a lot. I feel like the industry has really been coming out swinging the last few months, and that's on top of some really cool stuff going on. Gail Simone and Dave Marquez are doing just an amazing job on Uncanny X-Men. I really like Jeffrey Thorne and Marcus Toe's X-Force. I think that's really cool. And Jackson Lansing and Colin Kelly on NYX, I think, is probably my favorite of the relaunch at the moment.
Yeah, all the UX stuff. Yeah,
DC's got some cool stuff coming. I was lucky enough. Scott Snyder showed me all the inks of Absolute Batman #1, and kind of walked me through what that story was going to be, and that is going to be a really cool. That's a really cool looking book. I think that thing is gonna take off like a rocket, and deservedly so.
I have no doubt.
That's just that's just the few things that I can even like think of off the top of my head. But there's a whole bunch of cool stuff coming that I haven't even read yet that I'm excited to.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time to be a comic fan. and to be in the comic book industry in any shape or form, or just a fan of the industry. Like there are so many amazing books and creators out there right now. There really are. Like for anyone watching, if you are looking for places to start, please put it down in the comments. Please ask if you're looking for recommendations, what stuff you're into. I have no doubt we can send you in the direction of something that will catch your eye.
Yeah.
I've always stood by the meta of there's a comic for everyone. Whatever your tastes are, whatever your genre is, whatever you're into, there is a comic out there for you, and I guarantee we can find you it. Whatever that looks like. Talking about your creator-owned stuff, there was one last thing I had to ask, and there might not be an update in it or anything like that, but I had to ask because it was the last big thing we talked to you about. When are we getting the OZ number 3?
Yes, it is coming. So Ruben Rojas is working on the last batch of pages now.
Yes.
I think he's drawn.
I've been waiting years for this book.
75%. He's drawn 75% of the last issue. Now I'll say it's on me. It wasn't on me earlier, but I wanted to wait until we had like a good critical mass of artwork before we did the next Kickstarter. The thing that I didn't anticipate, there were two things that happened that I was not expecting. I wasn't expecting Space Coast to take off the way that Space Coast did. So I realized I had to very quickly pivot to make sure that I gave that book the attention that it needed. And secondly, I'm getting married in like a month.
And
I did not realize.
Congrats.
Thank you. I did not realize how much it's going to consume my life outside of writing. And so,
being there.
I pragmatically speaking, I know that all of my friends and family are all flying out to California in a month to see me get married. I didn't have it in me to ask them to also back my Kickstarter immediately thereafter. So we
are. It's fine. They're at the wedding. You just send a hat round at the wedding, and you're like, "By the way, this is for the Kickstarter. Just put a check in. We'll be good." You know.
So that will be taking place sometime next year.
Nice.
But the thing is already written. Like I said, Ruben is rounding third base as far as the art is concerned. I want to make sure that I take this is very technical, but like a lettering pass, because I wrote that book a few years ago at this point. I think I finished writing it, and I finished writing it around the same time I finished Scout's Honor.
Oh, wow. So it's been a while. It's been a good few years.
It's been a minute. So I want to take just a now that we have all the art, I'm going to take like a quick lettering pass just to make sure that like, is there anything I can trim? Anything that I can streamline? But the lion's share, no pun intended, is just about finished. So it is coming. My goal, although things get weird in the scheduling, but I would like to have this done. I would like to launch March, April, May of 25, somewhere in that window, and I feel very confident that we can hit that. Yes, it's just been a little bit of chaos on my end these last few months, and that's why I haven't been able to do it in the window that I would like. But ultimately, I want to have as much of the art done before we do this next Kickstarter as possible. I know we've made everybody wait, but Ruben Rojas has been doing such a killer job on all of this that I think it'll be worth the wait. I'm very excited for everybody to get to see the whole series. Put together. We've got.
Which, by the way, for anyone joining us and is watching this and has joined us because we're talking Space Ghost and has no clue what the OZ is, I'll link up in the corner our last interview that we did with David talking about it. The OZ is basically a post-apocalyptic war zone version of Oz, essentially.
Yeah. I had pitched it as the Hurt Locker meets the Wizard of Oz, with a little bit of Mad Max thrown in there for good measure. And we're very excited for that. I was emailing Ruben Rojas this morning.
Oh, nice.
He had sent in another page this morning, and so I read that over. So that is a book that is near and dear to both of us. I know Ruben's been juggling a lot of stuff on his end as well. He got married. He's in Spain. COVID ran rampant through Spain while he was working on this issue. So, but no, we are both very, very committed to this. I cannot wait to do this. The only thing I can say is I apologize to any Kickstarter backers that have been waiting patiently for this next one. It's literally just life got in the way a little bit, but like I said, the thing has been long written. It's just polishing some dialogue at this point, and once all the art is together, I think people will hopefully see that the story was worth the wait.
Absolutely, and I had to ask about it because
That's
awesome. I've been super excited for it. We were huge fans of it. Went all in on the last Kickstarter that happened. Obviously, we got to meet you in person last year at C2E2. I got you to sign my issue 1, which is up on my wall and behind me. Got you to actually sign my issue 1 of the OZ, and I'm like, I need to. See. I don't know if you can see it for here. Where is it?
You point at it, I'll see it. I see it. I see it. Yeah, I see that issue 1 cover. Yeah, the first one. Yeah, issue 1, that Ruben Rojas cover.
Yep.
Thank you. I love that cover.
Got it up on my wall, got it signed with David Pepose, and got to meet you at C2E2. And I'm like, I knew as soon as I seen you were going to be there, like, yep, I'm getting this signed. I'm taking it with me. I have been a huge fan of the OZ since the thing first, was mentioned. When you first mentioned it to us, I was all in on this book, and I'm like, I need issue 3. I need to ask him when he's on, just when this book's coming. I've been waiting. I'd like to say patiently waiting, excited. But it's not very patient. But
you've been great. Thank you for asking. Thank you for being patient. It is coming for sure, and yes, the whole team is committed. So we're very excited to cross the finish line on this one.
Absolutely. All right, I think that's it for me grilling you on your other stuff. Did you have any other questions or anything you wanted to ask Nitro or anything that...
No, I think I asked everything that I wanted to ask. I just want to thank you, man, for coming again and talking with us and chatting comics. This is really cool. I always enjoy this, man.
Yeah, missed this a lot.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate all the support you've given my books, and I appreciate you taking the time to give such in-depth feedback on Space Ghost. So much of this work can feel very isolating, and I think the feedback is what keeps me going in a lot of ways. Just knowing that somebody's out there, somebody's listening, somebody's heard it, and so the fact that you guys have gone in depth into the work, it means a lot. It's certainly something that I look forward to whenever I see that you're posting about it. So can't wait to show you what else we've got up our sleeves with Space Ghost. The fun is only just getting started.
Absolutely. And is there a release date for Space Ghost number 5? Do we know the official date for that?
Space Ghost number 5 is coming out September 11th.
September 11th. So September 11th at your local comic shop. I'll put links to Comic Shop Finder and to the digital versions and stuff where you can get them down below. So please go and pick up Space Ghost number 5 when it comes out, and go and pick up issues 1 to 4 if you have not done so already. And where can they find you online, David? You're pretty active on your socials. Where can we find you and your tags and stuff?
You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at PeposeD, or on Facebook at davidpepose.com. You can also visit my website, davidpepose.com. There's a few sections that are still under construction, but the most part it's fixed now. And then, or you can subscribe to my newsletter, Pep Talks, at bit.ly/pepnews.
Awesome. And I will make sure to go ahead and link as many of those as I can down below for you all to go and just click straight there and check it out. But David, thank you so much for joining us tonight and just chatting comics. Pleasure. It's been a long time, and it was well worth getting to catch up. I absolutely had a blast tonight. This was so much fun. And for everyone that's watching, thank you so much for checking us out and hanging out with us today, and hope you enjoyed our interview. Make sure, if you've not done so already, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future Let's Talk Comics, where we talk with these amazing comic creators, and also so you don't miss any future reviews we'll be doing, because I'm definitely going to keep reviewing Space Ghost as it hits our inbox. That's 100% in the future. But thank you so much for everyone hanging out with us tonight, and remember, it is a good week to be a geek. Take care. We'll see you all later. Peace.